Hello, it's Adam from the Tudor Chest here. If you like this podcast, then perhaps you would consider becoming an official patron via patreon.com, where I release a weekly subscriber bonus podcast episode, as well as other additional benefits. From as little as £5 a month, you can get access to all content from the Tudor Chest. To access this, just head to patreon.com/The Tudor Chest or search for the podcast in Apple Podcast subscriptions, where you can also access all subscriber episodes. Dr. Estelle Paranque is a historian and associate professor at Northeastern University London. She joins me today for a discussion all about her latest book, Thorns, Lust and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. This book, which came out early last month, has garnered hugely positive responses from critics, and it's not difficult to see why. Estelle, more so than any other book about Anne Boleyn before, tells a story which paints Anne Boleyn's momentous fall in May 1536 in an entirely different light. We see that Anne's destruction was not so entirely determined by the machinations of Thomas Cromwell, but in part owing to the huge shifts in European power politics at the time. Anne's power and influence, once so great, was ultimately cut down, and she found herself in a position where she was all but abandoned. It is this, which Estelle discusses, that tells us how much greater the storm around Anne Boleyn actually was, and that in the end, she was betrayed not only by her husband, but by the people from across Europe who had once been firm and trusted allies. Welcome back to the Tudor Chest Podcast, episode 42, Thorns, Lust and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn, with Dr. Estelle Paranque. Welcome to the Tudor Chest Podcast, Dr. Estelle Paranque. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm very excited for our discussion today because you're here to talk about your new book, Thorns, Lust and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. I absorbed the book in a matter of days. It was so exciting because it's a really compelling read. There's a lot of new stuff in there, which I know we're going to get to talk about shortly. But before we do, just a few questions just to get to know you a bit better for anyone who may not know you. So can you just provide a sort of short intro into your background, so where you grew up and what you now do full time?
I'm from France originally. I was born in Lyon, so the middle of France, and then I grew up in Paris. I started doing my studies in Aix-en-Provence. So I moved quite a bit. So it's very hard for me when people are like, where are you from? I just say France because it's a bit all over the place. And somehow I just say Paris because it's where I spent most of my life there. Just, the years. So obviously I'm a historian, as you know. That's why you're having me. And I'm an associate professor as well. So I've been teaching at university for a very long time now, for almost 14 years. But I've been in history for 10. So it's been a very long journey to get where I am today. But I guess when you have a passion, you have to follow it.
Absolutely. Where did your passion for Tudor history start?
It started at university. So I was 17 in Aix-en-Provence, and I had my dad didn't want me to do history. So we agreed that I would do English studies, and in English studies so I did translation, I did linguistics and all of this, French and English linguistics, and then I did literature and history. And I had this lecture on literally, so I did Henry VIII and all that. And yes, I was like, yeah, that's cool. Well, I thought it was mental, actually, the idea that a man could have 6 wives. But then I had Elizabeth I, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, a woman who's ruling on her own for 44 years. And then my love for it, never never wavered. And
Mm.
obviously I got very interested in Elizabeth I, but obviously I think once you start being interested in her, you're interested in her story. So you're interested in her younger years, and then you're literally drawn little by little to the story of her mother, I
Mm.
think. Do you see what I mean? Like it's kind of, well, for me, it went that way. I guess some people start with Anne Boleyn and then go to Elizabeth, but me, I started with Elizabeth and went with them, went back.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? It does, when you have a passion for Tudor history as well, I find that a lot of people will kind of also, once they've absorbed as much as they can with the Tudors, they'll also start going one way or the other, as in they'll start looking into the Plantagenets or they'll start looking into the Stuarts. And people kind of tend, I think people tend to split, go either way. Definitely been the case with me. I'm now, I would say,
Yeah.
as interested in the Plantagenets as I am the Tudors, which is a bit of a controversial statement, but it's definitely one I notice a lot of people have.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I'm starting to get more and more interested in, the Plantagenets as well and their history with France at the time.
Mm.
But equally, I've already done some research and I've started working on stuff on the 17th century. So I think I started first going now I'm going back slowly. I think it's just there's so many interesting and intriguing parts of history.
Mm.
I don't think you can get bored really.
Definitely not. And I think what I love about the Plantagenet story as well is actually when you look at it, there are an enormous number of fascinating, powerful women who were so crucial to the story that I think that's often missed. I mean, we look at the Wars of the Roses, and actually there were just a lot of women who had a really big part to play in that whole story, and that's something that I think again is sometimes overlooked. What is your Tudor pet peeve? If you have one.
You know what? The other day I was thinking I did have one. That was something that really annoyed me. But you know what? I'm gonna think of one because I've been working on my YouTube channel for this. And one is the fact that we call Mary the First Bloody Mary still. Like that. And I'm not a historian on Mary, and
Mm.
I admire and love the work of historians who work on Mary the First. But I think it's so sad that all their works, like honestly, it's been for 20 years now. Like in academia, it's been like easy 20 years, but even with Linda Porter and stuff, and still we still tap into she was awful, she was dreadful. And honestly, when you look, what she's done is no different from what Henry II in France did. And yet we don't call him Bloody Henry.
Mm.
We think he was amazing to kill the
Yeah.
heretics and do everything he's done. It was absolutely brutal in France like that. And Mary just did what she thought was, what she was supposed to do, right? Also when
The
people are,
right
oh,
thing
but
to
she was
do.
not nice to
Yeah.
Cromwell. No, I don't want to swear here, but like, seriously, Captain Obvious, like, you think that she would have loved Cromwell? Like, and I
Mm.
think that, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think so many people miss the point of her life and how her teenage years have been destroyed and how humiliated she's been for years.
Mm.
And no, I'm not shedding. I'm not shedding. I'm not sorry. And no, I'm not throwing shade to Anne Boleyn because I don't think we can discuss that. Anne Boleyn was not nice to Mary. Yeah, duh. Like, but it's not just that. It's the whole other thing. It's the whole humiliation she was suffering from. Anyway, so that's my big pet peeve when people tell me Mary the First was that Bloody Mary. That gets nerves.
It's one of the reasons why I really loved the Becoming Elizabeth series. I thought it was excellent. And I think the thing that I loved the most about Becoming Elizabeth was that it finally did justice to Mary
I agree.
in a
Absolutely.
way that's never been done in film and television. Romola Gari was undoubtedly the MVP of Becoming Elizabeth. In fact, I remember saying to Claire Ridgway, it should have been called Becoming
I
Mary
know.
because it was so much. She was the best thing about it.
Oh,
It was incredible.
absolutely.
I loved her as Mary.
And so sad that there's not a second season where there's a
I
right.
know. Because there was going to be one, and we'd see the Jane Grey of it all, and then just it got cancelled. I was very upset about.
Because even the story with Lady Jane Grey and Mary is not that easy. Like for Mary, it was not easy to make that decision.
Yeah.
She was almost forced to it. Like, they just wouldn't stop with the idea of rebellion. And, so Lady Jane was always going to be a massive threat. But I always say Mary didn't execute her sister Elizabeth. Do you see what I
Mm.
mean? Like, yes, she sent her to a tower, which I think is harsh, especially when it was on the 19th of May. She did stuff on purpose, but
Yeah.
she had a kind of a bitchy side. But who didn't?
Yeah.
Like,
She was behaving completely in accordance with the times. And I think, to your point,
yeah,
that's just something we overlook. I think we've discussed this before. Her brother would have grown up to be far worse had he not died at 15. He had all the makings of a complete psycho. We don't call him Bloody Edward, you know?
no, you're right. You're
So,
totally right. Absolutely right. Yeah. So
yeah.
that might be best. Yeah, definitely one of them might be pet peeves or Tudor history. Yeah.
So, as I said at the start, we're here to talk about your book you had that came out earlier at the start of May, Thorns, Lust and Glory, The Betrayal of Anne Boleyn. It's your second book, which focuses specifically on significant women from the Tudor period. Your first was Blood, Fire and Gold, the story of Elizabeth I and Catherine de' Medici. When I was looking at them, what I was really struck by was that there is a clear symmetry between, the style, the way you've titled them. The books almost feel like a pair, even though they're not. Was this quite a deliberate choice, though, if that makes sense?
Yes, definitely is. So something that is very rare as well is that in the publishing industry is that I chose the names of my books. Usually you have an idea and then the publisher will say no.
Mm.
And you'll have a discussion with the marketing team and how to pitch it. But me, it was very clear when I was working on Elizabeth I and Catherine Medici that I wanted something that, you know, that it was easy to remember.
Mm.
And so I typed into a bit more like a fictional title more than a non-fiction. It couldn't just be Elizabeth I and Catherine Medici. Do you see what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
had all rival queens. So I'm not again throwing shades on titles like that, but I was trying to differentiate myself. And I thought that there was going to be blood. There was going to be, blood, fire, and fire was the war, and gold was the glory, right? So
Mm.
that was one thing. And then when I actually started my second book while finishing my first one.
Right.
So that's why I was like, because I was so intrigued. Basically, it all started because of that letter from Catherine Medici to Elizabeth that said, we should be friends. Your mother was friends with René of France and Claude of France. And so we should be friends. Like, because Catherine was really close to René of France and, being accepted at court by Renee. So
Mm.
like I think that she was thinking, there was already this strong friendship between your mother, Anne Boleyn and Renee. So I think we should do the same. And it just stuck with me.
Mm.
I was like, oh my God, but yeah, it's true. Like, yeah, Anne Boleyn was in France. And then there was the Boleyns, like BBC Two, the Boleyns, Scandalous Family. So I've been interviewed for that. And then I ended up participating and I did some research and then I started my book then. So, and so when I did, again, I was like, my publisher wanted something that was, that way you could pay, like you could recognize me in a store, so
Mm.
Blood, Fire and Gold. And I thought, if you have another title like that, and I was like, oh, and for me it clicked. Thorns, because, the Tudor rose, right?
Mm.
Lust, because can we really call it love? I mean, I believe Anne Boleyn loved Henry. I really do. I don't think Henry was able to love anyone. So I think he lusted her. But obviously there's more than that because it lasts longer,
Mm.
but I thought it was a great, a way of, very short word, like to say what it was about. And obviously glory, because they wanted glory. Henry wanted glory with his Anne Boleyn at some point wanted glory as well. Like she didn't expect to be Queen of England, but she wanted glory for her family and was an ambitious woman. So yeah, so that's why then it became very clear Thorns, Lust and Glory and Blood, Fire and Gold.
What was, I suppose, the inspiration for this particular book? I mean, given that a lot of the content in there is about Anne's time in France, I imagine your being French played a role in wanting to tell that side of her story.
Definitely. Also, I think that because I was so intrigued by that letter of Catherine Medici, I think I wanted to know if there was more on Anne
Mm.
Boleyn during that time. I don't want to spoil it, but in my book, it's a bit hard. So what I tried is really to take you into Francis I's court. And also something else really struck me was the fact that Anne Boleyn was so well traveled. And something I
Mm,
hadn't realized, because I think it's sometimes mentioned even in Eric Ives' biography, like it's like a bit the Anne Boleyn Bible, kind of thing. But like
mm,
you realize that, he mentions some stuff, but he never goes into the details of it. So for example, there's this journey to Provence in October 1515 up to January 1516, and Anne Boleyn was there. She went all the way to Provence to welcome Francis I from his first victory in Italy, the Italian Wars, Battle of Marignano. And she traveled with two queens and a duchess, obviously Margaret of Angoulême. So
mm.
I was like, oh my God. I just wanted to understand the experience of that. And I really believe that it impacted her, and then she was there at the big celebration of the Field of Cloth of Gold. She's always been there at big banquet. She's always been around and she's
Mm.
always experienced, even if it was in a back seat, the glory, everything that was wonderful, or, or even like the games of power, like the tricks and stuff. And so, yeah, I think the inspiration comes from all of that. And obviously, the fact that I'm French and I wanted to know, that's in my epilogue, but I wanted to know if the French ever remembered her. And then it
Mm.
just became also like very clear for me as well, like, why didn't they help her? And
Yes.
and obviously in my book it's what's covered, like um it is covered in that, and I think it shocked me to see how one man tried so hard almost until the end. Um
I mean, I was going to, ask. You've written a book which is biographical. It's the story of Anne Boleyn, but it's not your standard Anne Boleyn biography. And I think that a huge part of that is the fact that the content is fresh, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know about Anne Boleyn. Obviously, that's something I'm assuming you really wanted to achieve. And so, from your perspective, was there always going to be this big through line throughout, looking at Anne's time in Europe and how this impacted her eventual tenure as queen?
yeah, I guess it's really it was what was driving me to write it, I guess, like, like, and also it was also the relationship that she had with the different French ambassadors that really were very intriguing for me, because we say the betrayal of Anne Boleyn, obviously the French betrayal, right? There's a fleur de lis on the cover. I hope I made it,
Mm.
that my publisher made it clear. If it's not clear enough, I make it clear now. But it is, the thing that is very hard for people to understand is that, and I think it's hard for everyone, is to understand that everyone has their own personality. So even if you have like, even if a king, I think Francis I liked Anne Boleyn on a personal level, right? But
Mm.
and on a political one, she really helped him at a certain point, and it was very valuable. And he really thought with Anne Boleyn being so close to Henry, that will make the Franco English alliance very strong, which, it was all about politics and diplomacy, right? But equally, the men that were sent to the English court, the Frenchmen, some of them were like, yeah, okay, she's okay, but she could be annoying as well. I love her for that, but she could be annoying. We know Jean du Bellay really liked her, absolutely no doubt. But you have others that were liked liked her enough because they were also told to make things work with her, to work with her with Henry. Do
Mm.
you see what I mean? But
Yes.
then once there's Elizabeth and there's no other male heir right after, some ambassadors really show what they thought, and really show that actually they really think that the marriage and stuff, and she's really Queen of England, maybe not. No, I'm thinking about Chabot, who's gonna go behind her back, gonna go to try to see Mary, gonna go try to see Catherine of Aragon. So you have people who are like, no, we don't agree with that shit, even if Francis has said whatever. You see what I mean? Like, and so, and I like this complexity as well of relationship. And I try to bring that up. I try to bring that up in my book.
Yeah. I mean, Anne's time in Europe is, generally speaking, it's kind of fleetingly covered. You expand on this massively in your book. So can you just describe or tell us about the particular households that Anne served in and how she came to be at these places? Because she served in at least two different royal houses, didn't she?
Yeah, so it was thanks to her father, right, Thomas Boleyn, who was very smart to put her, first at Mechlin with Margaret of Austria's court. I can't remember actually. I think she stays a year or something, or 15 months, something like something quite, that would impact you, especially,
Mm.
Uh, but then obviously once there's a marriage between Louis XII and Mary Tudor, like she has to go to France, to Paris, and she's supposed to serve Mary Tudor. But things are going to change. Mary Tudor is going to go back to England. And then again, we don't really know how she stays, but I believe that obviously it's Thomas Boleyn who's like saying, well, my daughter is already there, really wanted her to have an education, really wanted her to continue her French, develop her French. Probably he thought as well that it would be useful to have her there and to it's not to call her a spy, but you see what I mean? Like she would probably report stuff. But the problem we have is that we don't have these letters, but we
Mm.
have. I think it's so great that we have one event that it cannot be disputed is the fact that Thomas Boleyn knew something that was happening before everyone else in England. With Claude de France, the Queen, who was not feeling well. And obviously, how would he have known if it's not through Anne? So it's obviously we have here the idea that okay, Anne is writing the correspondence. And why is it an asset? It is an asset because then he could write directly to Francis and say, I'm so concerned about your wife and show like a personal connection. And it's important for him to be seen as someone who cares and who understands what's going on and knows the personal stuff as well as the political stuff. And so that's what I covered in my book. I've really tried to get down to exactly who she was serving. And again, it was a massive frustration because we don't have all the records for all the household per year. We do have some, and her name appears, especially with Claude of France, well, Mademoiselle Boleyn. But we don't have like the households for every year for Margaret of Angoulême. So I know that in 1518, Anne was not serving Margaret of Angoulême, but I cannot be 100% sure that she was not serving in 1519, 1517, 1520. We don't know. What I know as well for sure is that they did spend time together because they would have been at the same events. And, again, on the journey to Provence, they spend the time together. So there's the influence of all these women that were very different
Mm.
on Anne Boleyn.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in particular, the what you think the impression was made on Anne by Queen Claude, Marguerite of Navarre. It seems like Anne sort of dazzled wherever she went and sort of made a real impression. What do you think these women actually inspired in Anne in a way that we don't necessarily always put together?
So I think there's two things. I think that there was different impressions on her. Like for Claude of France, what was very clear for Anne, in my opinion, from what I've read, right? So in a way, it's kind of subjective. So I'm saying that. So don't think that's the whole truth. You can have your own opinion. Like,
Mm.
people are listening as well. Like, but from what I've read and what I think is the fact that Anne Boleyn, by seeing Queen of France, Queen Claude being such yes, okay, her husband was a womanizer, sleeping around. Any man was sleeping around. The kings were even the worst, right?
Mm.
But the one who remained the queen, the one who remained respected, the one who remained glorified was the queen. So that was the first thing I think that went in her head. Like, I don't really, okay, mistresses. Oh, Francis I had very, very powerful mistresses, especially Anne d'Etampes. And she must have thought, okay, cool, she has titles, she has wealth and everything. But at the end of the day, when there's a diplomatic event, yes, Anne d'Etampes was never far away, but the queen was Claude, right?
Yeah, the Queen was still the Queen.
The queen was still the queen.
Mm.
So I think there was that, okay? There was that type of influence. I also think that, honestly, I think they got on well. Otherwise, I don't see Catherine Medici making that kind of remark to Elizabeth years later. So, but it might
Yeah,
have
that
been
must
just,
have been known for her to
yeah,
remember that and to be aware of it. It must have been a known thing.
yeah, that she probably was accepted, right? Like in the circles around Claude and Rene, because Rene was also serving her sister, Claude, right? Claude was the eldest, Rene was the youngest, and Rene was also a lady in waiting. So, the bond with Anne Boleyn must have been, I think, must have been strong,
Mm.
especially same age, around same age and stuff. So that's one thing. With Margaret, it's very different. With Margaret, we have someone who's much older than her for the first, for the first part. Like, I mean, that's a very important point. And second, I think here it was the influence, like she must have been impressed by Margaret's education, Margaret's independence. But what she didn't realize is that Margaret could have all of that because of her brother. Her brother accepted it. There's a very strange dynamic, not strange, but there's a very strong. I'm not talking about strange in a weird way. I'm talking here about, because there are rumors that there was incest, and that's not what I'm not going to tap into that at all. I don't believe in that. Like Francis I would have raped his sister, stuff like I mean, no. Anyway, you know what I mean? Like, so when I say weird, it's not what I mean here. I mean that Louise of Savoy has raised her two children very close together. But I think she really infused in them a strong sense of like, we are in this together, right? Like, yeah, but the three of them, right? It's the three of them and like together. And so, and also she's older than Francis. And I think that Francis always had that massive respect and admiration for his sister. He knew that she was extremely intelligent. So when she's starting annoying him, because she does annoy him, siblings and stuff, by, reading books she should not be reading, by questioning a bit more, like saying, oh, it's not that bad what they're doing, I think, because, you don't just you don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm a Protestant, right? The Reformation has happened 3 years. And I think at the time when Anne was at court, I don't think that Margaret was a Protestant at all. It's more reformist, right? And it's more towards the end of her life. But I think it must have really impacted Anne, the fact that she was so curious about what was going on, reading about stuff she shouldn't be reading. But also, sorry about that. But also, it's the fact that Margaret as well was like the type of woman that could do all of this because she had a protector that, and they were linked by blood. There was no way that anything could have happened to her. She would not have been sent to prison. She would not have been executed. She would. It's not going to happen. So I think she kind of forgot Anne Boleyn wasn't. And
she was protected by her status in a way that ultimately Anne never could be. Yeah,
exactly, and never could be. So I think the influence of like she's influenced by Claude in the fact that the status of being a queen, that even if your husband is sleeping around. But what she forgot as well, it's not, for Claude, it was a dynastic marriage. It's not a love match, right? So it doesn't really matter who he's sleeping with, who does he love and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, he needed her really to really assert. I mean, he wasn't the heir to the throne, right? Like, but she was as well. If there was not the Sally Claude that would prevent women to go on the throne, she would have, right? And also she was the Duchess of Brittany by her mother. So like, and she was the ruling duchess. So she was not a bloody nobody, right? She was someone very influential, very very important. So I think she realized that for her, a queen was someone highly respected, and she was highly respected. Way more than any mistresses from Francis I, because they had enemies, right? You're always fighting when you're a mistress to keep your status at a very high standard. And with Margaret, I think it's a more education, it's more independence, like the influence is more about that, like, oh my God, she's a woman, she can think by herself, and she can say what she thinks, and yes, but again, there's a reason for that.
I mean, I think that's totally what would have just massively influenced the woman that Anne became, based on what we know about her.
I think so. I really do. I really think that they played, and sometimes I think like maybe I didn't tap into enough about Louise of Savoy and the relationship with Anne, but I don't think there was. I mean, I haven't found much, but anyone in your listeners that are listening to this, maybe you should try to tap into that, because maybe there's more to discover on this. Because Louise of Savoy is also a massive figure in France.
Once Anne Boleyn began her real ascendancy at Henry VIII's court, what evidence is there of how she rewarded those, or sort of kept in contact with those that she'd spent a lot of time with in Europe?
That's a very good one. So we don't have much, because actually, as you know, like, lots have been destroyed. But what we know is that obviously from the French ambassadors that it seems actually that there was still that kind of link. And we also know from Lancelot de Carle, who's written the poem about her life, The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn at the end of he goes back to everything that's been through, that she's been through, and he goes back through her life. And here we have this idea that Anne Boleyn was really strongly connected to France. So I don't know why he would have done that if it wasn't true.
King Francis I's support and allyship with Anne Boleyn is an almost constant thread throughout your book. And, you describe it as a relationship which it comes across as a relationship which was quite volatile, which was sort of mirrors the relationship that England had with France at this time. Do you think that ultimately it was a relationship that rested ultimately on mutual self-interest, or was there genuine respect and friendship there at some point?
I personally think that Francis I must have liked, like he must have thought, oh, remember her as the little lady in waiting to his first wife. Oh, she's cute, right? Like she's nice. Now, do I think that it's more than that? Like, I think on a personal level, he really liked her. There's something that really struck me. In 1532, they met again in Boulogne. Henry ordered Anne to not meet Francis, so to not come to the dinner. Anne is going to not listen, come with all her ladies in waiting. And there we know, and it's not just Chapuis saying it, because I love Chapuis and his letters, but he wasn't there. They had a conversation, okay? An oral conversation. That's what we miss in history. For us Tudor historians, Adam, it's like we rely so much on the letters, on the diaries, on the but we forget that these people were also talking, right? So, and we'll never know what they were saying. All we know is what happened before, what happened after, what we know from the letters. For him to spend the time to have a discussion with her, it might have been to just piss off Henry VIII. I honestly would not completely disregard the idea. But also, to me, it shows that he liked her. And actually, there's one very good scene that has been in historical shows, like it's the Tudors, when there is that meeting and they recreated that conversation. Like, obviously, we don't know what they said, so they completely invented it. And actually, I thought they were very smart about it, because he's telling her in that discussion, so it's with Natalie Dormer. And thank you, I was going to say Portman. Oh my God. But Natalie Dormer, and he's like basically saying, like, I don't really know why you would want to become queen. Like, he was really warning her. And I don't know if he did, but I thought it was an interesting take. All I know is that they met, that they ended up having a private conversation. It really annoyed Henry. It really did. Also, he probably should, like, Anne was like kind of confident and kind of comfortable talking to another king. You don't have that usually. Someone who's like, yeah, I'll go and talk to you in private. That's not how, you have protocols, you have everything. And the fact that she did, we don't really know what they told each other. All we know is that after that, we have Anne, who basically let's face it, she accepts to have sex with Henry because then she's going to be pregnant and then she's going to have a daughter. So like, it happened, right? And after that, there's also like a wedding, and then there's the coronation in 1533. So like all this, the 1st of June. So like all of this happened after she talked in private with Francis. So did Francis say, if you remain very, loyal to France and advanced, you will always have your back? I don't know what he said. Like that's where you can completely like speculate. But all we know is that then she feels a bit more confident, too confident. I don't know. Or maybe he said like, I'll find a way to get the Pope to... But then he gets very annoyed. When actually everything happened, he's like, what? Shit, I haven't said like, he's like, and then there's a turnaround. But at the same time, he's waiting. He's like, okay, you're pregnant. So if you have a male heir, it's not all for nothing. And then she has a girl. It's like, oh, it's almost like, oh, women, seriously? You're fucked up.
Yeah, it's actually that it's also portrayed in Wolf Hall, I think, really beautifully, because there's that scene where there's a dance and Anne is talking with Francis and Henry's looking quite angry, and Mark Rylance as Cromwell says to the Duke of Norfolk, your niece has done enough diplomacy, kind of intercept. So I think it's portrayed really well in Wolf Hall as well. I was going to ask you actually, as sort of as a follow-up question to that, is, you know, do you? It's very easy for us with hindsight to pinpoint the beginning of Anne's downfall, really, from the moment that she gives birth to Elizabeth on the 7th of September. How much of an impact do you think that the fact that she was female had on Francis sort of starting to turn against Anne in a way?
I think it was a disappointment for Francis, but I think it was not really that really nailed the thing. Like, it's the fact that then she got pregnant and then she had a miscarriage and then she got pregnant, then she had another, and that's when they were like, because in many ways she has it was good that she got pregnant and had a healthy baby, right? So there was still hope. They were like, okay, she can carry until term. She doesn't die giving birth. And she, and the baby is healthy. I mean, well done, right? Like, well done, woman.
Yeah,
so
totally.
They think probably, okay, she can do that with a male heir, but it doesn't happen. So I think that really the downfall doesn't really start in 1533. It's more like it starts when Henry gets, and once the political situation as well doesn't help. Like, there's more and more tensions, there's more and more problems in Europe, there's more and more problem with Charles V, who was like, oh my God, this is such an insult to my aunt. You have all this stuff. And so I think here it's really like a power struggle where they don't want to give up on Anne because they don't want to give up on Anne. I'm going to tell you why. Like, we have in 1534, 1535, 1534, the last attempt, from Jean du Bellay to go to the Pope and convince him, to recognize the marriage and the union of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And he really thinks it's going to work. He's going to be betrayed. Like, sorry, spoilers, but he's going to be betrayed and stuff. But you think it's going to work. And he's going to even be betrayed by Henry himself. Because the truth is, like, people think that Anne Boleyn is responsible for the break with Rome. She isn't. Is she criticizing what's happening with the Catholic Church? Is she like a bit like Margaret of Angoulême, like reading stuff and being like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem right. But she's not a Protestant.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest misconceptions. And neither was Henry ever a Protestant. It's a real misconception.
Exactly. But Henry was ready to throw everything to get more money, to get more, and to fund. Like, it's an ego trip as well. He's on a power trip. And Cromwell follows along because he's seen what happens to the people who don't follow along to his demands, right? Wolsey. So he follows along. But when Anne talks about the dissolution of monasteries, she's against it. And we can see Anne is trying, but Anne is getting also frustrated. At some point, she's just, is the Pope going to just say yes, and then we can move on with our lives? But she's not really for the break with Rome until she has no other option, right? Because otherwise she has to throw away everything she has. And she does it also for her daughter, right? What's going to happen? I think it's someone more selfless than we think she was. Like, some people are like, oh, she was so not nice, da 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 da. And actually, I find her very selfless because she tries to save the men who are innocent, accused with her, were innocent, and she obviously tried to save her daughter from anything that could happen to her. That's why she has this speech where she says nice stuff about Henry. I mean, honestly, she must have thought, oh my God, all the things you promised to me, all the things you told me on one-to-one, all the things that you told me on the pillow, that I was the love of your life, that you would, you can imagine what, and now you would kill me. You would let this happen. This man is a monster. Like, sorry.
When we think about the betrayal of Anne Boleyn, it's very natural for us to immediately jump into May 1536, particularly to sort of hone in on Thomas Cromwell. And what I loved about your book is that you actually expand on this enormously, and that the betrayal is much bigger. And ultimately, spoilers, the betrayal in what you sort of point out is that the betrayal came from many quarters, and in particular, in a big way from Europe. So how would you describe the betrayal of Anne Boleyn? What role did Francis I, in your opinion, play in destabilizing Anne? What role did some of the women that she had once counted as friends, how did they all
come together to sort of really destabilize Anne's position?
It's a very good question. And I think you're right. It's ultimately it's much more complex than just Cromwell turning on Anne Boleyn. You have Henry turning on Anne. The fall of Anne Boleyn for me starts with the
Mm.
death of Catherine of Aragon. That's it. When then she's, it's game on. But in terms of the French betrayal, it starts when
Yeah.
Francis no longer sees Anne Boleyn as helpful. Yeah, he thinks, okay, like that's not going down well. Henry VIII has other love interest. He knows all of that because the ambassadors are telling him, and then he doesn't send any people who support her anymore. He sends Chabot, who's absolutely dreadful. He must have known that Chabot didn't like her. He must have, uh, and so they almost change. Almost they changed you know. Yeah, because like Francis is now talking about marrying his son with Mary and not Elizabeth, which is an insult to Anne. It's a big slap in the face. And obviously, Chabot, when he did, it's Chabot who said that, but obviously, Chabot was receiving instructions. I don't believe Chabot would have overruled what Francis the First wanted, right? So the betrayal starts here when they stop believing in her, when they stop
Mm.
believing. Now, do they think that she might risk her life? No. I don't believe that for any of them. At any moment, they think that's what's going to happen to her. They think that what's going to happen is she's going to be discarded, is going to marry again. And that's why actually the French put forward an actual French princess, right? Can't remember her name now. He put his own daughter, I think, for potential marriage, Francis. So literally a real, because I call Anne Boleyn in my book the French substitute, substitute French princess, but he is literally putting a French princess forward, right? And later on there will be Marie de Guise, who is, people wanted her, and she's like, "Oh no, I don't want to be married to a murderer or something like that." She's a white woman. But to go back, so I don't think they think for a minute that I would. What they think is like her downfall, but her downfall is like, oh, she's gonna be sent to a convent and retire as a nun, and Elizabeth maybe with her or declared bastard and end of. Do you see what I mean? At no point they think that, because the whole thing is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And I don't think that anyone with a brain bought it. The accusation made against her are awful, awful, and so impossible. One of them is like 2 weeks after giving birth, you went to Hampton Court and had sex with, this man, whatever man. 2 weeks after giving birth, she was like, I was in Greenwich. No, you were in Hampton Court. Yeah, everyone knew I was in Greenwich, bleeding my ass off because you bleed shit after giving birth. But yeah, I so wanted sex that I wanted to go on a barge to go to Hampton Court to fuck someone and then come back. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You
Oh, well,
meant
I mean, I think it's something like 80%, something like 75 or 80% of the accusations, it can be proven, are completely made up because she wasn't where they say she was and things like
and that's awful.
Yeah, it's
But the French,
bruising.
and it went so fast. There is almost no moment where the French could have, honestly, by the time they knew, you have to get it's 2 weeks. We're not in social media, it's not like, oh, I saw on Instagram and then everyone knows, Instead, she was executed. The French knew, boom, she was executed, right? So,
Mm.
wow. And I don't think, and I would like to think that maybe if they had known, they would have offered maybe for her to retire in France.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was going to ask you as sort of final question, really, was, we know that Anne, as Catherine of Aragon would have been, had they had healthy male heirs, she'd have been absolutely secure. I don't think there is any doubt about that. But do you think her position was made worse by the fact that she was not, that her one-time allies in Europe sort of had abandoned her? Do you think that made matters worse for her?
Yeah, definitely. I think ultimately what it shows was that Anne Boleyn was not royal blood.
Dispensable.
And I think that as much as she tried to appear, as a French asset, as a French agent, as a French substitute princess, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, she was not blood related to Francis. If she had been, that would not have happened, right?
Yeah.
And
We only need to look at Catherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves,
exactly, would have never happened. Never
Yeah.
happened. But they were,
And so it is a sad story. And I think that maybe, but I still do believe that maybe if they had more time, if it had taken longer to do, if they had been like more room, because they, even Shappy was surprised with what happened. Like like, I mean, people were starting, of course, there were like signs that there were tensions between Cromwell and Anne, and that, all of this was true. But to a point where she was arrested, it was complete. She was supposed to go on a journey to Rochester or something with Henry. So like completely blindsided her and others. And I think that maybe I'd like to think that if she had more time, maybe Francis would have said, okay, let's chill. You divorce or whatever. We annul the marriage. And if you don't want her in England, she can come to France. I'd like to think he would have said that. Now, do I, I don't have anything to prove it, but I would have liked him to do it. For sure.
Yeah, and that would have been a nice thing. That would be a nice thing to consider, for sure.
Yeah, but then we would not have had Elizabeth,
Absolutely.
because that's the other thing. It's like the fact
Yeah.
it's her death also that allows Elizabeth in many ways to be reinstated at some point, because like she doesn't exist anymore. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if she had gone to France, she would have had to take Elizabeth with her, as for sure, because Henry didn't care anyway. So yeah, take your and then we know, and then they would have just been living in a convent in France. So no Elizabeth first, no, no all of this. I don't know. It's a bit sad, isn't it?
It's really sad. But to your point, we wouldn't have had Elizabeth, and I think that's obviously the great irony, isn't it, of Henry VIII's whole reign, really, is that the monarch that supersedes him as the best of the Tudor monarchs is the daughter that was the biggest disappointment, I suppose, and the daughter of the woman who, that died in such ignominious fashion.
And it's Anne Boleyn's revenge.
I always describe it as it's the biggest cosmic fuck you, I think, ever.
I agree. And I do love it. I just find it so heartbreaking that, for Anne and Elizabeth to have not this time together as well. Like, but anyway, yeah, but it is a massive
Totally.
Love it.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk today. This has been such an interesting conversation. As I said at the start, I was really keen to speak to you because I adored this book. And for anyone who hasn't read it yet, I listened to it on Audible, and I literally went through it, I think, in about 48 hours. So go out and buy it, folks. It's amazing. And thank you so much again for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. I love your show and I love what you do. And I love how you promote Tudor historians, but how your love for Tudor history, or just history. I mean, you're such a great historian yourself, and I cannot wait what you have in store for us as well.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks again, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, speak soon, Adam.
And so that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Tudor Chess Podcast. My thanks to Dr. Estelle Paranque for coming onto the show and discussing her latest book with me. If you have any suggestions for future podcast episodes, please do reach out via Instagram, or if you're a channel patron, via Patreon. Next week, I am sticking with the world of Anne Boleyn and chatting to Dr. Nikki Clark all about Anne Boleyn's household, which incidentally was a subject request from one of my followers, Courtney Grace Reed. So look out for that next week. Thank you again for listening to the Tudor Chess Podcast, and speak soon.